Welcome. This is a presentation by the Waltham Historical Society and also sponsored by Historic New England. It's entitled, Ain't We Got Fun? Waltham in the Roaring Twenties. Ain't We Got Fun is a song, a popular song. I think it came out in 1922, and it kind of reflects the feeling of optimism that the United States in Waltham experienced in the 1920s following the conclusion of World War I. If you're watching this program, I encourage you to consider joining the Waltham Historical Society. It's an organization that's been around since 1913, and it has done a great job preserving Waltham's history. And Historic New England operates many historic houses throughout New England, including the Lyman Estate and Waltham, and they have always been a great neighbor and a great partner for the city of Waltham. The picture on the title slide here, that's an actual advertisement for Waltham Watch Company. And Waltham Watch Company was an international company. They sold their products all over the world. You can see a Waltham grandfather clock. And the woman there, it's a Christmas time, and you can see the way she's dressed. But look at the short haircut called a bob, which was popular with women back then. And the picture kind of conveys the money and the elegance of 1920s America. One of the things that you'll see during the 1920s, one of the big changes, different forms of entertainment, particularly the movie industry. And the pictures here on the far right, that's Rudolph Valentino, who was one of the big stars of the silent movies of the early 1920s. And the woman in the middle, her name is Clara Bow. Her nickname was the It Girl. And she was a big star of the silent screen. And I'm not going to comment on the other picture on the left because that's coming up in a minute. So we had the beginning, the flourishing of the movie industry. And here you see a couple of posters, movie posters of the 1920s, The Sheik, and that is starring Rudolph Valentino. And just like today, you have sequels. Back then, you had sequels also, Rudolph Valentino in The Son of the Sheik. So where would you see movies in Waltham during the 1920s? Right in Central Square. So if you know where the Merc is, right along Moody Street, there was a theater. It's called the Central Square Theater. It opened in 1918, and it opened as a silent movie house. It closed in the early 1970s. So where you're looking now, it's just a little ways down Moody Street, right where the Merc is today. And another theater in Waltham was called the Waldorf. It was also known as the Music Hall, and that was located on Elm Street. So the next time you're in the parking lot of Waltham City Hall, or if you're driving down Elm Street with Waltham City Hall on your right, look on the left, and you'll see a building, the Music Hall or the Waldorf, that has been wonderfully restored. It used to be much bigger. It went further back. The back of it was taken off in the early 1970s. And that was another theater in Waltham. And that opened up even earlier than the Central Square Theater. And of course, the big theater in Waltham during the 1920s, it's the Embassy. And the Embassy opened, I believe it was 1928. And when it opened, it was unbelievable to have something that luxurious outside of a major city. It was the motif in it was Spanish swords and tapestries and things like that. At its peak, 2,500 people could see one movie at the Embassy. And the Embassy opened, it was used for silent movies. It was used for vaudeville. And the Embassy will stay in business right into 1972. In 1972, the city of Waltham buys it. And unfortunately, the city of Waltham tore it down. So if you're not familiar with the Embassy, where was it? right opposite Cronin's Landing, right opposite where Margaritas is. And it extended all the way back into Pine Street, where the parking deck is today. And the parking for the embassy is where the senior citizen housing on Pine Street is now. So it was a huge parcel of land, and this ornate, wonderful theater that opened in Waltham during the 1920s. Okay, on the right, there's the embassy. And if you look at the marquee, around it, you see light bulbs. And just like in New York on Broadway, the light bulbs would be flashing. So that's actually a 1930s picture. If you see I think it's 1939, 1940, around there. If you see the movie Haunted Honeymoon, Robert Montgomery, so it's not 1920s, but that's what it looked like. And the picture on the lower left, that's the Waldorf Theater, that's the music hall, and that's all been restored. And the picture up above, that building, believe it or not, is still standing. If you're driving down Moody Street from Main Street, it's on the left-hand side, and it's down near South Middle School. And that was the Waltham Theater. And they were kind of like B movies. It was a place that maybe a lot of kids would go. The embassy was a place you'd go, maybe if you're trying to impress your date. It was a fancy, fancy theater. Another form of entertainment that was popular during the 1920s, of course, was dancing. And in Waltham, the dance hall was Nuttings on the Charles. Where was it located? Well, if you know where Waltham Watch Company is, if you go down, Waltham Watch is at the corner of Prospect and Crescent. So if you go down Prospect Street, go over the bridge from Waltham Watch Company, Nova Biomedical will be on your right. Look to your left, and you'll see pilings sticking out of the Charles River. On top of that was Nuttings on the Charles. And it opened as a dance hall in 1914. Down below, if you look, let's just put that right there, there'd be canoes. So you could rent a canoe, you could canoe on the river, you could dock your canoe out here in the river, and you could listen to the music. If you're walking down Prospect Street now, right about here, you're going to see some stairs. They just kind of go down to the river. Years ago, they went down to where the boats were on Nuttings on the Charles. And on the other side, right over here, they would book different different acts. And the woman there, her name is Texas Guinan. Her nickname was the Queen of the Nightclubs. And she ran a series of speakeasies. She had dancing girls with her. And she put on a show at places like Nuttings on the Charles. And there's Texas Guinan, Queen of the Nightclubs. So how does she tie into Waltham? Well, Nuttings on the Charles books her for a performance. Now, this was actually in 1930, so it's right at the end of the 1920s. And she is coming to Waltham with all of her dancing girls. And naturally, there's a lot of buzz in Waltham about it. A lot of people are planning to attend. And what happens? The mayor of Waltham, Mayor Patrick Duane, who was the first Irish mayor of Waltham, he used to walk down Moody Street wearing a top hat, an Abraham Lincoln hat. He was in Waltham politics from the early 1900s right through the 1930s. And he said, I'm not going to sign off on this. Texas Guinan's show may be all right for Broadway, but it's too hot for Waltham. So what happened? Well, Texas Guinan called Mayor Duane, and I'm sure she charmed him. And eventually, and this was, by the way, this was headline news all over the country, that the mayor of Waltham was preventing Texas Guinan from performing in Waltham, just what she'd like. It gave her a lot of publicity. He calls Mayor Duane, and Mayor Duane agrees to allow her to come in with the dancing girls as long as they didn't kick their legs. So people lined up along Prospect Street when she entered Waltham in her in her open car with her dancing girls. Naturally, it created all the publicity that any performer could possibly want. Music. If you know where Waltham Watch Company is, right across the street where the parking lots are today, there was there were two parks. There was a park called Robbins Park, and right next to it, a park called Fitch Park. And on Robbins Park, you can see the bandstand, and it was huge. You can see it over here, an actual picture. This one is actually a photograph. It's a color postcard. They used to take a picture and color those in by hand. But the watch company band and other bands would play there. On a nice summer night, people would uh, go down to Robbins Park and listen to the music during the 1920s. Entertainment of the 1920s. The 1920s is sometimes called the golden age of sports. And of course, the premier name in sports was Babe Ruth. And remember, he's with the Red Sox, and then they trade him to the Yankees, but he owned a house in Sudbury. So he frequently came through Waltham. He used to bowl in Waltham quite a bit. In fact, there used to be a bowling alley, and it was right on Main Street near Central Square. It was called something like the Belmont Bowling Palace. And he used to bowl there. He used to bowl down on Moody Street. And in 1923, he was coming to Waltham for the Elks to serve turkeys. And if any of you know where there's a picture of Babe Ruth in Waltham, someone must have taken his picture. I have never seen one. I would love to see a picture of him where you could identify Waltham in the background. He was frequently here, but as far as I know, there are no pictures. Another major form of entertainment during the 1920s, radios. And the first radio broadcast is 1920, the election of Warren Harding as president. But having a radio in your house, it was something that brought families together because you'd have the radio in your living room, just like today you'd have a TV, and the family would gather around the radio and listen to programs. A big corporation at the time, comparable maybe to um, Apple Computer, was Radio Corporation of America, RCA. And at Waltham, of course, the stores were all selling radios and phonographs. And if you look at the name of the company here, Park Snows. Park Snow was a big department store. The building is still standing. It's on Moody Street. And they're selling phonographs. And it looks like they're selling them for $1. But if you look carefully, that will place any of these wonderful photographs in your home. And then you buy it on the installment plan and you make a monthly payment. Another popular form of entertainment during the 1920s, we have the Charles River in Waltham. So we have the uh, people canoeing on the Charles on the upper left-hand corner, particularly in the early 1900s. Canoeing was a big sport. There were boathouses along the Charles River. One was called the Waltham Canoe Club. Um, People would rent a canoe, they'd buy a canoe, and they'd spend weekends just canoeing along the river. And there would be hundreds of canoes out on the Charles River. And the picture on the left, right over here, that's Fox Island. So Fox Island is down at Forest Grove, and the beach that you're looking at would be right about over here. Now, the beach opened on July 21st, 1924, and it's called Forest Grove Beach. If you go down to the island section of Waltham, you can still see where it was. And they built a float. And the first year it was open, 1924, 11,000 people visited that beach in one summer. And just to give you an idea of how big it was, 250 feet long. So we're looking at an era before most people they don't have summer homes, they're not going to Florida. So having a local beach down at the river was a big deal. And there's the beach on the right-hand side. Look at the number of kids, number of people swimming out there. And on the left, all of the canoes docked along the Charles River. So 1920s Waltham. Popular sport of the 1920s. Remember, the 1920s is a time of wealth, and the stock market is booming. So you get a lot of people joining country clubs. We had a country club in Waltham. It was called the Waltham Country Club, and it opened, I believe, in 1922. The clubhouse was the Gore Estate. Now, the Gore Estate had been a private residence, and then Charles Metz bought it in 1911. Charles Metz was an auto manufacturer. Metz lived in the place upstairs, and downstairs was a car showroom for his Metz cars manufactured in Waltham. And then he went out of business, and it became a golf course. For you people who are really into golf, it was designed by Donald Ross. And I've been told, and I don't know this, that he is one of the premier golf course designers in American history. So he designed a 9-hole golf course here at Waltham. If you look in the middle at the scorecard here, okay, so you can see how long each of the holes was. But take a look at the 4th hole, 521 yards, par 5. That is a big, long hole right there. Another one of the signatures of the 1920s, Prohibition. So Prohibition, the prohibiting of the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages, synonymous with the 1920s. And naturally, when liquor was prohibited, organized crime moved in to fill the void, to provide liquor to people. The man on the left, the mugshot, that's Al Capone, never in Waltham that I know of. Crime down below, you might have heard of these men, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, who were accused of murder. They were executed in 1927. They were Italian immigrant anarchists accused of murder, and they were executed. And on the right, the man is knocking at a door. So once liquor is prohibited, the bars close down. What takes their place? Speakeasies. So a speakeasy is an illegal bar, and you would knock on the door, and you can see the person looking out of the hole there, and the person would say, what do you want? And if you knew the password, you were allowed in. And once you went in, you could buy drinks, and maybe you'd see important local officials in there, but it was an underground nightclub, so to speak. Okay, crime during the 1920s. If you look at the Waltham newspapers, I think crime must have sold newspapers, and you see these lurid stories about gambling and drinking and all kinds of crime. So here in 1923, gambling in Bicycle Park flourishes. Bicycle Park is on South Street. That's where Nippers is. It opens in 1894 as a bicycle racetrack when bicycle racing was big. And it was a grandstand. You can see it right there. So this is Nippamar Park. And you had the bicycle racetrack going around. And down below, there's a grandstand. And look at the park. So this is the west end of Waltham, right off of South Street. So gambling was flourishing there. Look at this headline, July 25th, 1923. Drunkenness in city during past year has increased alarmingly. Federal help may be sought to oust booze. And I put this together just to show you how many people are being arrested for drunkenness and for violation of liquor law. So in 1917, now liquor is legal, 512 people were arrested for being drunk. 1918, quite a drop there. Maybe they weren't enforcing the law quite as much. I can't picture all of a sudden people just stop drinking. And his prohibition right here, 1923, 223. But then look what happens. 223, 388, 646, 672, 847, 849 in 1929, drunkenness. And you look at the violation of the liquor law, and that's also going up. So this is a peak year. So what does that mean? Okay, does that mean that in 1925, that was the most people who were drinking and breaking the liquor law, which would mean they've got speakeasies and they're making liquor in their homes? No, it probably means this is when the police were really enforcing it strictly, because look what happens afterward. Look at the numbers. And in 1933, prohibition is repealed. And take a look at what happens in 1934. Drunkenness, the number of people drunk, now liquor is legal, goes almost to 900, the biggest number here. Violation of liquor law, only 4 people, and I don't know what they did, but you can see how the statistics change. This is not Waltham, the picture on the left, but that's in the United States. And you look at the newspaper, all kinds of words are used for liquor. You'll see booze, you'll see hooch, you'll see moonshine. Police try to find source of hooch, July 17th, 1923. 1922, many samples of moonshine. Booze cargo is unloaded in Waltham. So you read the newspaper accounts, it almost sounds like was Chicago at the time. This is another interesting newspaper headline. It's July 28th, 1923. Waltham Evening News. Trip through hell may be conducted at Mount Fee. Shameless scenes, outrageous and scandalous acts. So what was happening? Well, young people, young men and young women were taking out their cars and going to Mount Fee, and they were making out. So the police were going in and trying to clean the people out of there and raid it. The picture down below, that's Mount Feek right here. Okay, so during Prohibition, I saw this in one of the newspapers. It caught my eye. Consumption of ginger ale has increased enormously at restaurants in the last 3 years, as diners are slipping a drop or two of something else in the glass. So all of a sudden, companies that are selling ginger ale and club soda and soda water, they're doing very well because people are buying those types of soft drinks to mix in their moonshine, their illegal liquor that they're buying. In Waltham, the company that manufactured ginger ale, right over here, you can see the truck, the New York Bottling Works. Originally, they were on Massasoit Street. They ended up being on Ward Avenue down on the island. And at the very end, when they changed their name, they're on Main Street in Waltham. But that's my grandfather there when he was a young man. And he worked for Mr. Fisher, straight out of high school. And he drove the truck and got to know the business. And when Mr. Fisher retired, by then they had changed the name to Fisher's Ginger Ale. My grandfather owned the company. And here's that truck, Fisher's Ginger Ale. Their telephone number, 4 digits, Waltham 1450. So there's my grandfather. And there's my dad as a young man back in the 1950s, right before the company went out of business. And that was one of his workers, a guy named Bud Halfpenny. So they were doing a big business in ginger ale during the 1920s because of Prohibition. Big hall of moonshine. Once again, that picture on the right is not Waltham. That's a generic picture of a moonshine raid. Okay, on the left, a speakeasy. It's not a Waltham speakeasy. But you knock on the door, you give the password, you go in, and you enter this magical world of people drinking and dancing and maybe jazz music and having a ball. And the password used to be often be someone's name, like Joe sent me. You'd knock on the door, you'd whisper, Joe sent me, and they'd let you in. So on Main Street in Waltham today, we have a tavern that has taken that as their name, Joe sent me. By the way, that is not an original speakeasy, that building there that I know of. Okay, and even up by the Cambridge Reservoir, police clean out bunch of schooners from water basin. Um, Billing and cooing rudely interrupted by officers of the law, and names of the parties involved are taken down. So what's going on? Once again, these are, boys and girls, young men and young women going up there and pulling off to the side of the road, and they're making out. So the police were cracking down on that up at the where the Cambridge Reservoir is. Okay, in politics, Mayor Dwayne over on the right, and you'll see Mayor George Beale and his brother Henry Beale, who was the city manager. And the picture up above, that's Waltham City Hall. So his Waltham City Hall, but originally this was Waltham City Hall. Right in front of it, that's Rumford Hall. Rumford Hall was built in 1826 by the Boston Manufacturing Company, and it was a lecture hall. It was a lyceum that was owned by the company, and they would sponsor on Saturday nights. They would have speakers come in, and you could join Rumford Hall, the Rumford Institute, and I think it was 50 cents a year, and you could attend on Saturday nights and listen to lectures by such people as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Mark Twain. Famous scientists would come, and it's one of the first lyceums, adult lecture hall in the United States. So by the 1920s, the building was too small, it was antiquated, and a new city hall was needed. And the place that the city wanted to build it, if you know where McDevitt is, Old Waltham High School, they wanted to build it right across that area across the street over to Main Street, Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant Street is there. And everyone was pushing it. The local newspaper was pushing, let's build it there. The politicians were behind it. They put it on the ballot, and the people of Waltham voted it down, in a huge number. So Mayor Beale came back with another plan. Let's build Waltham City Hall right in the common, right behind Rumford Hall. And that's where it was built. Rumford Hall, there was a veterans group that was hoping to move the hall and turn it into a museum, a veterans museum. Unfortunately, when they looked at the building, it was too far gone. It was too decrepit to do it. So it was torn down. It's a shame we lost that building. Okay, let's stick with politics for a minute. So national politics. 1920, here's the Democrats. And this man right here, James Michael Cox, no relation to me. And this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Notice that he is not in a wheelchair. He gets polio as an adult after the 1920 campaign. And they are running against Republican Senator Warren Harding of Ohio and Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge. So who do you think Waltham supported? Okay, Harding and Coolidge, 6,421 votes. Cox and Roosevelt, 2,374. So a convincing win by Harding and Coolidge. 4 years later, Warren Harding dies in office. Calvin Coolidge becomes president. He's running on his own in 1924. He's opposed by Democrat John Davis, a Wall Street lawyer. Who does Waltham support? Coolidge, the Republican, by a landslide. Robert La Follette was the Progressive Party candidate. He was a senator from Wisconsin. And William Foster was a communist. he was the Communist Party candidate. So we know there were 7 communists at Waltham in 1924. 1928. Okay, the roaring 20s are at their peak. There's a lot of prosperity. The Republicans nominate Herbert Clark Hoover for president, Secretary of Commerce during Harding and Coolidge's presidency. And the Democrats nominate Alfred Smith, the governor of New York, the happy warrior, the first Catholic to run for president. The picture behind it, that's Main Street. So here's Main Street, Waltham. And this is the Central Block, still standing today. This is Lexington Street. That's the Watertown Savings Bank. City Hall is over here. This would be the Merc, where the Merc is. But I put this picture in because if you look right here, Al Smith for president. So Republicans win Waltham in 1920. They win it convincingly again in 24. And now we look at 1928. So what's happened? Well, Al Smith does very well. Is Waltham becoming more democratic? Well, possibly. Remember, Al Smith is an Irish Catholic. So a lot of people in Waltham, at least, were voting their religion and voting for the first Catholic. And apparently, 5 of the communists have left Waltham in 1928. 1920s was also saw a huge resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. We tend to think of the Klan as something from Civil War times down in the old Confederacy, but in the 1920s it spread throughout the North. This is Washington D.C. in 1925, a march of Klansmen, and even in Waltham. And there were, in the 1920s, you'll see the Ku Klux Klan seeking to organize in the city. Fiery cross set in flame at Bank Square. On another occasion, a big cross was set up on the top of Prospect Hill, a burning cross, and set on fire. So the Klan never had many members here, but they were trying to organize in the city of Waltham. They had a rally in Waltham. And if you look at the King Clegal Farnsworth, he was a leader, not a Waltham guy, is speaker at Klan gathering, Hoots and Stones, Mass Serenity of Host Clavern. One of the famous crimes in Waltham was the Carbine murder on May 6, 1922. The Waltham Carbine, down around where Hannaford's is today, there was a murder that took place there during a robbery, and 3 men who took part in it were found guilty and executed. And that Carbine murder, that was famous all over the country. That was big news all over the U.S. Another theme of the 1920s, you see an awful lot of development going on in Waltham. So a lot of the farms, the small farms that had been in Waltham since the 1600s, they were being sold off. The farmers were selling them, and the land was being developed. In 1922, the Moody Land Company purchases a number of farms. They purchased 3 or 4 different farms, and they divided it into house lots, and they were selling house lots, some of which were on the lake, Hardy Pond, at very, very reasonable prices. So you get the beginning of Lakeview during the 1920s. And there you see Lakeview Park, Waltham. Look at the first line. Greater Boston's popular summer resort, acres of green fields, hundreds of giant pine and shade trees, lawn frontage on lake for boating, bathing, and fishing, etc. And the other picture there, it says, on this site will be erected the Lakeview Community Club. So that's up in Lakeview. And the picture below, that's Lakeview in the early 1920s. People are camping up there. People are building small bungalows, many of which have been added on to, and they've been winterized, and now they're year-round houses. but it starts out as almost a vacation area along the lake, along Hardy Pond. Another development is in the Highlands. Uh, Elson Road house lots and Irving Street. If you look at the streets here, you'll see Irving Street, you'll see Sunset Road, Plimpton Street, and you can see all of these house lots being built in, and the houses are being built during the 1920s. Look at the prices, 8 to 15 cents per foot. Another neighborhood that develops, Main and Gore Street, Rangeley Acres. And that would be, if you take a look over here, Main and Gore overlooking Country Club grounds. 20 cents per foot, 12 cents per foot. So Rangeley Acres is being developed in the 1920s. A South Side neighborhood that's developed on High Street, Parmenter Park, near the Whittemore School. So all these sections of Waltham are being developed. The population is growing. Waltham is booming. And imagine receiving this for a Christmas gift. So in the Waltham newspaper, 1923 in December, the finest Christmas gift of them all, a lot of land at Parmenter Park. Now today, if you were going to buy a lot of land at Waltham, you will be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Back then, you could give it as a Christmas gift. 1928, the Sibley Farm is sold, and it's developed as cedarwood. And I love the caption. This is the poster they put out, cedarwood, 130 acres of happiness. And they're selling large lots, $495 to $895. They're offering different house plans where you can come in and you can pick out a particular plan, maybe an English Tudor or a bungalow or a colonial or a cape. You can build different styles, and it becomes one of Waltham's iconic neighborhoods, Cedarwood. And in the early 1920s and 1923, the Bowker family sells off 66 acres of land, and you have the beginning of Warrendale. So you look at this. This is Main Street. This is Warren Street. This building is the paint store. Right over here would be the Shell gas station, but here's the paint store. And there's a little pizza restaurant here. Over here would be John Brewer's. And right here would be the karate studio and the convenience store. That house is still standing. And if you look at the sign there, right over here, this is a 1930s picture, because it says Public Works Administration. That was, they're building Warren Street. That was a make work program during the Great Depression, during the New Deal, the PWA, the Public Works Administration. And there's another ad for Warrendale, formerly the Bowker Estate on Main Street. And this picture here, this is Warren Street. This is Warrendale. This is, I believe, Hager Lane going up into Watertown. So what's happening on the municipal side? Well, I mentioned that we get a new city hall. So the new city hall is going to be built, and it's dedicated on January 6, 1927, and Rumford Hall is torn down. And what else happens? Well, a lot of the farming is disappearing. I kind of thought these were interesting headlines in Waltham. Piggeries in Waltham are doomed to go. Public Welfare Commission will refuse to give any more permits for piggeries. And a little bit afterward, in November, Waltham pigs find favor in board's heart. They allowed the piggeries to stay. And we actually had piggeries in Waltham right into the 1980s, where 128 is today. It used to be a lot of pig farms along there. Another event happening on the municipal side, a lot of new schools are built. And this school right here, let me show you what it is today. So that's South Junior High School. And originally, this is the building. It was called South Grammar School. If you know where the High Street Playground is, this is the building, South Grammar School, that was there. And this was torn down. And in the early 1920s, wonderful new school, South Junior High School is built. They also come up with the idea at the time, this was considered a reform, that an elementary school would be K through 6, and then you would have a junior high school, which would be grades 7, 8, 9, and then you would have a high school 10, 11, and 12. So Waltham went on a 6-3-3 plan. This building is North Junior High School, and this will eventually be torn down. This was the North Grammar School, and it will be replaced by North Junior High School. You'll recognize this today. This is Waltham Government Center. And right here, that would be Lexington Street, and this is School Street. Just go down a little further, and you'll come to the Chateau and St. Mary's. But North Junior High School was built. Think for a minute, when this was built in the 1920s, that was considered North Waltham. There's really nothing north of this except farmland. Today, you would not be at the Chateau or St. Mary's or Government Center and say, I'm in North Waltham. You're a block from Main Street. Other new schools that were built during the 1920s, you might recognize this one right up here. This is the Lawrence School. That was on Trapello Road. It's still there. And here's the Whittemore School. And that's named for a famous superintendent in Waltham, a Civil War vet named Henry Whittemore. So both schools still standing. This is the back of Government Center. So this is North Junior High School. And right over here, another school built during the 1920s, the Hardy School, which replaced the little school right over here. So there's a Hardy School. Okay, during the 1920s, industry. So the 1920s, it's a wealthy decade. People are doing well. Moody Street is thriving. And the picture over here, here's the Moody Street Bridge. This would be Grover Cronin's is today. You're looking down Main Street. Remember, there were no malls at the time. So Moody Street at the time, one of the biggest shopping districts in Eastern Massachusetts. It wasn't just for Waltham people. People came from all over Eastern Massachusetts to shop there. And another new industry, so to speak, during the 1920s down below, cars are becoming more and more prevalent. You need filling stations or gas stations. And this looks like a Texaco. I see the star. And that was on Lexington Street, kind of near the police station. So that's one of the gas stations in Waltham in the 1920s. Interesting pictures here. So this one right over here, this is Moody Street, Pine Street, Crescent Street. This is in a pickle today. This is Queen Cleaners over here. The buildings really haven't changed much. I mentioned a minute ago, Park Snows is the old Park Snows building. So there's Moody Street in the early 1920s. And you'll notice the streetcar runs up and down Moody Street. It went down to Crescent Street, down to Waltham Watch Company. And right down here, you see Moody Street again. And the first chain store on Moody Street was Woolworth's. Woolworth's was a national chain. It opens in Waltham in 1905, and it closed down fairly recently in the 2000s. I don't remember the year, but Woolworth's, the 5 and 10. And another retail district was Main Street. This is City Hall, where City Hall is today. This was a furniture store. It was called Clarkson's. Today it's a bank, but that was a furniture store. Okay, you have to have places to buy food. You need restaurants. So J.M. Quinn on Moody Street, Wayside Restaurant. I put these in just so you can see some prices. So the thing that caught my eye here as I looked at the prices, look at haddock, 5 cents a pound. 5 cents a pound. I think it's the cheapest thing you could buy back then. Today, it's one of the most expensive things. And if you look over here, look at fish in season. Once again, haddock is the cheapest, but fried pickerel. Now, pickerel is a freshwater fish. You'd find them in the Charles River and Hardy Pond. Uh, selling fried pickerel for 40 cents, fried pickerel dinner. I've never seen that on the menu anywhere. And the big stores in Waltham, the big department stores, Park Snow, it opens in Waltham in 1919. And Grover Cronin's, which goes back to 1886, I believe. So those were the two big department stores in Waltham during the 1920s. And of course, we're still a factory town during the 1920s. The two big factories, you had the Boston Manufacturing Company, and that building is still standing today, the Francis Cabot Lowell Senior Citizen Housing. And that is where the Industrial Revolution began. That was doing well in the early 1920s, but it closes down at the end of the 1920s. It goes bankrupt at the beginning of the Great Depression. And remember, that's where the Industrial Revolution began in America, in that building. And a few blocks away on Crescent Street, the Waltham Watch Company is in business. And I put something I saw in the newspaper in 1923, unionization of watch company aim of workers. The following year, there will be a bad strike at Waltham Watch Company. It will go from August until January of 1925. The company ends up winning the strike. The man who owned the company at the time, a man named Fred Dumaine, and he said, I'm going to get the company profitable again. It had been losing money. It was on the ropes, and he straightened out the company. Dumaine stayed in Waltham until 1944. He sold out then. The company survived for another 10 years, and it went bankrupt in 1954. Another popular sport of the 1920s is boxing. And the two big names in boxing, Gene Tunney, and if you look on the left, you'll see he is a champion. Jack Dempsey, the Manassas Mauler, was the challenger. And they had a famous bout that Gene Tunney won. Okay, so how does this tie into Waltham? Well, this is Jack Dempsey, the Manassas Mauler, and this is watch. So I know it's kind of a tenuous connection, but Jack Dempsey had a Waltham watch. Another important industry of the 20s is the aircraft industry. And the man who was synonymous with that, Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh, his plane was the Spirit of St. Louis, becomes the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. He became one of the heroes of the 1920s. In the 1930s, you might have heard of his baby was kidnapped, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. But anyway, how does he tie into Waltham? Well, he doesn't, but his plane does. So if you go to the Smithsonian, you can see the clock from the airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, and you'll notice it is a Waltham clock manufactured in the Waltham Watch Company on Crescent Street. The big industry, the signature industry of the 1920s is cars, the automobile industry. And Henry Ford is the big name in cars. If you look on the right, he is selling a brand new car in the early 20s for under $300. He doesn't invent the car, but he puts America on wheels. He came to Waltham quite a bit. He was very friendly with the owner of the watch company, Fred Dumaine. And there's a great story that he came one time, he was visiting in Waltham, and he came to Mr. Dumaine, and he said to him, and Ford is a gruff guy, and Dumaine is a no-nonsense guy. And he said, Fred, I want your engineers to develop a speedometer for my cars, and I'll look at it the next time I come out. So a few months later, Ford comes back out to Waltham, and Dumaine brings out the markup of the speedometer, And Ford looks at it and says, that won't do. I don't like it. And Dumaine said, what's wrong with it? And he said, the name, it says Waltham on it. The only name that goes in my car is my name, Ford. And Dumaine said something to the effect, that's funny. When I showed it to the people at General Motors, they didn't seem to mind. And Ford, after he heard that, agreed to purchase the Waltham speedometers. And if you look in any Model A Ford, they are equipped with a Waltham speedometer, many also with a Waltham clock. Henry Ford came to Waltham. At the time, we had a car company. It was called the Metz Company. And the Metz Company goes bankrupt in 1922. And Ford came out and checked out the Metz Company plant, which is where BJ's and Watertown Ford is today. And he was not interested in purchasing it. So with cars comes a problem, and the problem is traffic. And this was in the News Tribune. Henry Ford is churning out cars at the rate of 6,700 a day. And the traffic officer at Central Square is of the opinion that most of them pass through Waltham. We complain about traffic today in Waltham. In 1923, they were still complaining. That's the Model A. That's not Waltham, the picture, but that's the Ford Model A. And that's a Waltham speedometer. If you go to car shows, people who are selling old parts, you oftentimes you see the Waltham speedometers. And there's all different at the time cars companies that have gone out of business: Hudson, Essex, Chevrolet, Buick, and these were all dealers in Waltham, car dealers in Waltham. These cars were not manufactured here, but the dealerships were in Waltham. And this is the Waltham car company, the Metz Company. They have kind of a neat logo there, similar to the Ford logo, I guess. And this was down in the island section of Waltham. This was on Rumford Avenue. Metz Company motor cars. Right here, you can see they'd build the cars in here. They'd come out right here and they'd drive them and they'd test drive them. Metz cars were sold all over the world. And Metz became so big, he bought the Gore Estate, and he bought what is today where BJ's is, and Watertown Ford, and all those buildings down there. And he was manufacturing cars like this. Before World War I, Charles Metz was the second biggest manufacturer of cars in the United States. But what happens during World War I? The company is seized by the US government. Metz is a German name. He was a German American, but the government took over his company. There was suspicion of all things German. And he got the company back after World War I. He tried to manufacture cars again, but he couldn't compete. And in 1922, 1923, the company went bankrupt. There's some pictures. He owned the Gore Estate. He lived upstairs. His family lived upstairs. The downstairs was a car showroom for the Metz cars. And you people who remember Raytheon, that's the old Raytheon building, the Sawtooth building. This is when Metz owned it. There's all his cars. And this would be right where BJ's is today. The railroad tracks are right there. This is one of the last cars he built, the Metz Master 6. And that sold for over $2,000. This was an inexpensive car. I think this is about 1913, $395. And once again, his logo up there. And then he liquidates. They sell off the company. Mr. Metz moves out to California. The last car he manufactured right up here, he called the Waltham. He was trying to capitalize on the name Waltham Watch Company, but it didn't catch on, and the company goes bankrupt. Another big industry of the 1920s, manufacture of weather vanes. And Waltham, one of the things that's not well known, Waltham was a major center in the manufacture of weather vanes. They were made of copper, and they were made by a company called Cushing and White. They were on Main Street in Waltham. And those weather vanes today, you're looking at, sometimes they go up on auction. A Cushing and White weather vane could be as much as $50, $60, $70,000 for the collectors spend for these. And the company goes out of business at the end of the 1920s. Why? People stopped building barns. Why do they stop building barns? They don't have horses. Some people are building garages, but they're not placing weather vanes on the top. So the demand for weather vanes disappears, and Cushing and White Weather Vane Company closes down. Another industry, it's coming to an end, but the ice industry was still flourishing during the 1920s. And on the Charles River, we had Peterson's Ice House. And on Totten's Pond, which was on Totten Pond Road, there's Totten's Ice House right there. And you can see the ice is the pond. There's the ice going right up into the ice house, and they would fill this with ice. They would pack it in sawdust. So you would have, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 feet of ice cakes, and the ice would be sold right through the summer. And this picture here, 1924, the men are harvesting ice on Totten's Pond. So that was all filled in. And that's, if you know where the skating rink is and there's condos near it, that's where Totten's Pond used to be. The story over here, a two-horse team owned by J. Totten and Sons, engaged in hauling ice, broke through the surface of the pond and went into 5 feet of water. You're going to have industry, Waltham was a big center of industry. You're going to have accidents. And if you look at the 1920s papers, you see different stories about people injured in Waltham's factories. The story on the left, a mystery accident in the bleachery and dye works. And that's where Shaw's is today. But you can see skull and arm fractured, possible internal injuries. And May 22nd, 1922, a guy dropped a plate on his foot, a steel plate, and he lost his big toe. So we sometimes romanticize factories and factory workers, but there were problems then too. And when you look at the 1920s newspapers, the Boston Manufacturing Company is, as I said, it's going to go bankrupt at the end of the 1920s. They close it down, but the News Tribune stories through the 1920s are without exception, they're all positive. So Boston Manufacturing Company workers are supplied with gardens. Another time they were given daycare for their children. Another time they were fixing up like a nurse's station for the workers. So if you looked at everything in the 1920s, you'd say, wow, this company sounds like it's doing really well, but it closed down at the beginning of the Depression. And the bleachery, both these companies used to own a lot of houses along River Street that the workers would live in. Bleachery to put houses in best of shape. And many of the houses on River Street, that area in Lawton Place, they're old mill houses that were built by the Waltham Bleachery and the Boston Manufacturing Company. Okay, and we also get a lot of Italians coming into Waltham at this time. And the Italians, they could go to, they were Catholic, they could go to St. Mary's, but that was the Irish Catholic Church. So we get the beginning of Sacred Heart Church. And right over here, Boston Manufacturing Company makes offer of old Swedish church on River Street if Cardinal grants petition of Italians. The Italians wanted their own church. They were given it. And another industry in Waltham was the Newton Chemical Company. Now, this company began, I believe it was 1922. It closed down in 1972. They manufactured chemicals for the Boston Manufacturing Company, the cotton mill, and for the Waltham Bleachery. It's called the Newton Chemical Company because at that time, the South Side was owned by Newton. And in 1923, city workmen were digging up at the corner of Taylor and Gardner Street, and they came across foundations from this company. And I thought it was kind of interesting. If you look at the story, they compared the people around there were so interested. They compared it to the guy that found King Tut's tomb. So they found bricks from the Newton Chemical Company and they compared it to the finding of King Tut's tomb in Egypt. So the 1920s, what brings it to an end? In October of 1929, the prices of stocks crash, heavy liquidation, drop of billions. You have the beginning of the Great Depression. And this is not a Waltham newspaper. When I was researching the 1920s in Waltham, I looked at Waltham newspapers in October and November. And interestingly enough, they're not highlighting the stock market crash. They're not even reporting it. They were focusing on local news. So this picture here, I think this might be the New York Times. But the 1920s comes to an end. The stock market crashes. The roaring 20s comes to an end. So thank you for watching. And once again, if you're interested, I encourage you to join the Waltham Historical Society. Good night.